When police asked why she didn't call for help, she whispered, "I thought he'd sleep it off." The baby had a fractured skull and broken ribs. So why did his babysitter go to McDonald's before anyone noticed he was dead? Her tiny mouth was open, but no sound came out. The baby's body had gone stiff in a way that defied instinct. Legs bent wrong, skin pale beneath the soft gray blanket. There was dried milk on his cheek, now crusted like wax. His lips, they were dark, almost black. When Heather pulled back the fabric and touched his chest, there was nothing. No rise, no fall, just stillness. And then she screamed, but the scream didn't break the silence. It only confirmed it. Inside the laundromat, time collapsed. The humming dryers kept turning, indifferent. A single sock spun behind the glass, thumping faintly with every revolution. Jessie staggered back. Her hand went to her mouth. She tried to speak, tried to say something that would make it untrue, but her throat locked. The coldness of the tiles seeped through Heather's jeans as she dropped to her knees, both hands pressed against the child's chest, trying to push life back into him. She didn't cry at first. She moved with mechanical urgency, following the voice on the 911 line, counting compressions aloud while her vision blurred. But what lived in her hands was not her son anymore. By the time the paramedics arrived, it was already too late. The child was pronounced dead on sight, 2 months old. Name, Benson Gardner, cause undetermined. And so began the shift from tragedy to investigation. What stood out immediately was the temperature of the body. Not just cool, but cold. A temperature consistent not with a recent collapse, but with prolonged exposure. The body had been lifeless for hours, and that changed everything. When asked who had last cared for the child, Heather hesitated. Not out of doubt, but out of something deeper, betrayal. She gave a name she had never spoken with fear before. Marissa Teetsort. She was not a stranger. She was a friend. Someone who had held Benson since birth. Someone trusted in moments of need. She had watched both of Heather's sons many times before. Never for pay. Just to help. That was what made it harder and colder. From the beginning, this case lacked the usual markers. There were no bruises immediately visible, no violent scene, no panicked phone call from the caregiver. Just silence. Just a baby handed back as if sleeping, wrapped tight in a car seat. Already gone. This kind of death, one masked as innocence, requires something particular. Not madness, not impulse. Something colder. The theory that emerged early in the investigation was simple, but horrifying. That Marissa had discovered the child unresponsive, made no attempt to revive him, and knowingly returned him to his mother. That she had zipped him up inside his blanket, watched the door close, and said nothing. But that was only one possibility. The other was that Benson never simply stopped breathing, that someone had caused it, and that someone had lied. In cases like these, we often observe a particular psychological pattern. A caregiver, overwhelmed, detached, emotionally numb. Not necessarily cruel, not by appearance, but carrying with them a quiet fracture, a place inside that no longer reacts like others do. These individuals do not scream. They do not run. They do not call for help. They hide. They conceal. And they wait, hoping no one will notice what they did, or what they didn't do. Marissa would later claim she didn't know he was gone, that she thought he was sleeping. But her behavior told another story. She didn't call 911. She didn't alert anyone. She didn't even ask if the child was okay when Jessie messaged her later that night. She turned off her phone and disappeared into a hotel room. What kind of person does that? It is tempting to say a monster, but monsters scream. They show their teeth. This was something else. This was deliberate absence, a choice to become invisible in the moment of greatest responsibility. What had once been a routine night had become the first chapter of something darker. And yet, at that point, no one knew the extent of it. No one knew what Marissa would eventually admit to, or how long she had carried the truth in silence. They only knew this: Benson did not die in his sleep. He died alone, quiet, and the person who knew said nothing. The apartment door had closed with an eerie softness. Not a slam, not a sound that said goodbye. Just a quiet click that Heather would remember later, over and over, as something too final for what should have been a routine pickup. She hadn't even stepped inside. Marissa had opened the door halfway, handed Benson over without a word, passed the diaper bag through the gap, and said nothing. No small talk, no gentle smile, no mention of tomorrow. Jessie had been beside her. She saw it too. The look in Marissa's eyes, blank, hollowed out. Not tired exactly, not angry, but distant, as though she had already gone somewhere else in her mind. And the air in that doorway, it was cold, colder than it should have been, like something had been left open inside the home for too long. They had noticed, yes. But what were they supposed to do? The baby was in their arms, wrapped, silent, sleeping, they assumed. The unease that stirred in Heather's chest was something she had learned to quiet. You don't question the people you trust. Not out loud, not until it's too late. What followed was routine. The drive, the parking, the lifting of laundry bags. And then, with no warning, the world shifted on its axis. Now, inside the station, with the walls too white and the lights too harsh, Heather repeated what she could. Not because she was ready to speak, but because the silence had become unbearable. The officers listened. They asked gently. Jessie filled in the spaces her sister could not. Marissa's name came up quickly. So did her address. A patrol car was dispatched. They knocked on the door. No response. The lights were off. No movement. No sound. Inside, the apartment was still. No one was there. Not Marissa. Not her boyfriend, Adam. Not their child. Just the faint odor of something sweet left too long in the kitchen. And a baby monitor still plugged into the wall. By then, Marissa's phone had stopped pinging towers. Her last location traced to a hotel room registered under Adam's name. The Plaza. Room 207. Officers arrived within the hour. The door opened reluctantly. Marissa sat on the bed, hair pulled back, one knee tucked beneath her. She looked up when they entered, eyes blinking slow. Not surprised, not upset, just tired. She asked what this was about. They told her. Benson was dead. She didn't cry. She didn't ask how. She didn't ask why. She just stared. And then she said something almost inaudible. I didn't know. It is important to understand what those words mean in the context of child death investigations. They are not denials, not outright. They are shields. They serve to create distance, to delay blame, to buy time. Detective Holtz, who had seen this before, knew what to look for. Not the words, but the spaces between them. The rhythm of the breath. The slight lift in pitch at the end of a sentence, signaling uncertainty or fabrication. When asked to walk through the timeline, Marissa began with shallow details. The children arrived. They played. She fed the baby. He was tired. He slept. That was it. Her voice lacked inflection. Her hands remained still in her lap. She mentioned the pack and play, the bottle, the blanket, but nothing more. No mention of crying. No memory of holding him again. No moment of concern. Instead, she talked about McDonald's, about what they ordered, about how long they stayed. It was as if the presence of food could replace the weight of death. The inconsistencies came fast. She said the baby had been quiet. Adam, in a separate room, said he had been fussy. She said he had been left in the car seat. Adam said he picked him up. 2 stories. Both incomplete. One of them lying. Maybe both. When confronted with this contradiction, Marissa didn't correct her version. She only narrowed her eyes and said she didn't remember. That phrase again. Another shield. I don't remember. But people do remember. especially when something breaks inside their world, especially when it is their hands that caused it. As the interview deepened, Detective Holtz leaned forward. She spoke not with accusation, but with resignation. She had seen where this led. The only question left was whether Marissa would walk herself to the edge of truth, or have to be dragged. It would take hours. But eventually, the silence began to split, and what came out of it changed everything. The truth didn't come all at once. It never does. It surfaced slowly, like something pulled from deep water. Murky, shifting, hard to grasp. At first, Marissa repeated what she thought she was supposed to say. The child was fine. He ate. He slept. He didn't cry much. He was bundled in his snowsuit. He looked peaceful. That word, peaceful. She said it twice. Too smooth. Too rehearsed. When asked again how long Benson had been in the playpen, her voice faltered. She said it was after McDonald's. No, before. She corrected herself, then changed the subject. It didn't take long for the gaps in her story to widen. Time didn't add up. Her answers became thinner. She blinked more. Her hands moved. Small things, tugging at her sleeves, brushing invisible strands of hair from her eyes. Detective Holtz didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply asked what anyone would want to know. Why didn't you check on him? The silence that followed was not remorse. It was calculation. She said she had the video monitor on. She said it would have made noise if he cried. She didn't say whether it had. She didn't remember if it was charged, if it was even facing the right direction. The more she spoke, the clearer it became. She hadn't checked at all. Marissa looked down, then a long pause. Her eyes were fixed on the tabletop. She whispered that maybe she had put him down too hard. She hadn't meant to. It wasn't like that. He wouldn't stop fussing. He wouldn't sleep. She was tired. That last part came out louder, like it justified everything. I was tired. That phrase, repeated in child abuse cases, carries an unbearable weight. Tired becomes the permission. The reason a child is shaken. The reason he's hit. The reason no one calls for help. Because the caregiver was tired. And in that moment, everything else disappears. Marissa said she had placed him in the pack and play. She said she might have done it fast or hard. She wasn't sure. He didn't cry. That was the part she repeated. He didn't cry. Detective Holtz leaned in, gently now. She asked how Benson was positioned. Marissa shrugged. She thought he was on his back. Or maybe his stomach. She couldn't remember. She never mentioned touching him again. She never described looking into his face. And then came the most chilling line of all. I left him there. I figured he'd sleep it off. That single sentence revealed everything. The indifference, the detachment, the belief that silence in a baby equals safety. That if she just left the room, the problem would solve itself. It didn't. When she returned hours later, the room was quiet. She touched him. He was cold. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She didn't search for breath. She didn't lift his body and rock him, begging for movement. She wrapped him back up, put him in the car seat, and waited for Heather to arrive. Then, she handed him over. No one knew it then, but she had already buried the truth. This is where criminal behavior diverges from instinct. A person who causes accidental harm reacts. They break. They confess. They reach out. Marissa went silent. That silence, that concealment, became the crime. In the final minutes of the interview, she asked for water. She wiped beneath her eyes, but her skin was dry. She said again that it was an accident, that she didn't mean to hurt him, that he just wouldn't stop crying. She didn't ask about Heather, about how the mother was doing. She didn't ask if there would be a funeral. She didn't say Benson's name, not once. What remained in that room was not guilt. It was survival. And yet, in the very way she spoke, she had already admitted more than she realized. There is a particular quiet that follows confession. It is not peace. It is not closure. It is the sound of something final. a door closing, a truth settling in the space between what is said and what will never be undone. Detective Holtz did not press further in that moment. She had seen the shift. It was small, but unmistakable. Marissa was no longer speaking to explain. She was speaking to reduce, to soften, to try, even now, to be seen as someone who meant well, someone who simply lost control. That defense, the tired caregiver, the overwhelmed mother figure, is common, but rarely does it survive the facts. The autopsy report had already begun to circulate, and it did not match her story. Benson's injuries were not minor. They were not the result of a momentary lapse or a simple mistake. His skull showed signs of blunt force trauma, more than one point of impact. His ribs fractured. There was internal bruising. His brain had begun to swell. None of it could be explained by being placed down too hard. He had been thrown with force, not once, likely more than once. When presented with this information, Marissa did not cry. She blinked, slowly, then said in a tone nearly too flat to register, "I didn't mean to throw him that hard." That word, mean, clung to the air like smoke, meaning intent, morality, all reduced to a single word, as if it changed what had happened. But meaning does not undo damage. Intention does not erase impact. Detective Holtz asked her to demonstrate. In the quiet of the reenactment room, Marissa used a weighted doll to show what she had done. She stood beside the pack and play, lifted it, and then dropped it in. Not gently, not with caution, but with the kind of quick, detached motion that comes when someone is more focused on finishing a task than protecting a child. The head of the doll landed at an angle, face down, shoulder twisted. She adjusted it, repositioned it, then stepped back. There was no emotion on her face, just a mild tremor in her hands that could have come from fatigue or fear. When asked what happened next, she paused, then said she went back to the couch, watched television, waited for Adam to return. The baby didn't make a sound. She repeated that phrase again, like it explained everything. He didn't make a sound. That was what allowed her to keep going, to eat, to pack the diaper bag, to leave the apartment and sit in the back seat of a car with a body beside her and say nothing. She wasn't numb. She was calculated. When Adam was later interviewed, his version only complicated the story. He claimed the baby had cried, that he had picked him up, that he had seemed alive, but those details unraveled quickly. He had no clear memory. He contradicted himself. And when shown the messages Marissa received that night, the ones telling her the child was dead, he went silent. In that silence, what emerged was not just guilt, but manipulation. Because while Heather was trying to understand how her baby had died, Marissa was writing love letters from jail. She reached out to strangers asking for money, promised affection, flirted, lied. She wrote to the judge, claimed she was misunderstood, that she was a good mother, that she loved children, that she had 5 already, and another on the way. Even now, even then, what she mourned most was her loss of freedom, not the life she ended, not the mother she broke, not the trust she shattered. And that, more than the confession, more than the reenactment, is what stayed with those who investigated her. That in the face of a child's death, she saw herself first. She was escorted back to her cell that night without resistance, no handcuffs, no outburst, just quiet steps against linoleum, and the low sound of the lock sliding closed behind her. From the outside, there was nothing unusual about her posture. No trembling hands, no downcast eyes. She sat on the edge of her cot, hands in her lap, staring straight ahead. That was the part that lingered. The absence of collapse, the absence of grief. Because grief, when it is real, swallows you. But what existed in that small, cold cell was something else entirely. Not sorrow, not remorse, only silence and calculation. Over the following weeks, more details emerged. Pieces of a longer history, patterns that had gone unnoticed, reports, closed cases, prior complaints. Nothing had ever led to charges, not until Benson. But in retrospect, the signs were there. Children injured, children frightened, explanations that made too much sense, bruises blamed on furniture, falls from low heights, nothing ever definitive, just enough to raise concern, never enough to act. It is often that way. With individuals who harm children, there is rarely a single act of sudden violence. More often it builds slowly, invisibly, beneath a veneer of normalcy. They are not the monsters we imagine in stories. They are soft-spoken, familiar, trusted. And that trust, that is their shield. Marissa had used it well. She had convinced others she was safe. She had convinced herself she was stable. And when things fell apart, she convinced everyone else that she had simply been overwhelmed. But there's something deeper, something colder, that lives beneath those justifications. A hollowing out of empathy. A disconnection so complete that a child's death becomes a problem to solve, not a tragedy to endure. In jail, Marissa continued to write letters. Not to Heather, not to the court, but to strangers, to men. She promised loyalty, intimacy, redemption. She used soft words, drew hearts in the margins, talked about second chances. She called herself misunderstood. She said she was a good mother. She never mentioned Benson's name. The trial came slowly, delayed by filings and evaluations. At one point, her defense team considered presenting a neurological explanation that past substance use had altered her brain, impaired her judgment, made her less responsible. But even they struggled to reconcile that argument with the facts, with the bruises, with the silence, with the lie that unfolded in a laundromat parking lot, where a mother held her dead son and screamed into a phone, begging him to breathe again. Benson never got to make a sound, but his silence told the truth. In the end, Marissa was sentenced to 37 years. A number, a consequence, a measure of time meant to represent a life that had only just begun. Some called it justice. Others said it was not enough. But justice, in cases like this, is never clean. It does not restore what was taken. It does not erase the moment Heather's hands touched her son's cold skin. It does not undo the lie passed between door frames. It does not wake the child sleeping in silence. What it does is name the act, hold it in place, refuse to let it vanish into excuses, and maybe that, in some way, is what keeps it from happening again. But the scar it leaves is permanent. A mother trusted, a child suffered, and the one who could have stopped it simply turned away.